Today we're turning this classic quilt block into this adorable pumpkin hot pad. It's perfect for your fall sewing and using up all those scraps. So let's make the sawtooth quilt block and then I'll show you how to turn it into your pumpkin hot pad. If you're new here, my name's Stacey, but let's get started and make this adorable pumpkin star hot pad. You can find a copy of these cutting instructions over on my website. I'll put a link down below. I also have a PDF pattern that you might like to purchase and I'll put a link for that down below too. We're going to start off by making our half square triangles 8 at a time. So I've got my 2 pieces that measure 6 inches by 6 inches. And on one of those pieces, I'm going to turn it over so the wrong side's facing me and draw a diagonal line from corner to corner. Now I'm going to go pretty fast with this because I have a full tutorial showing you exactly how to do this if you'd like to see it in more detail. So then what we're going to do is we're going to place our 2 pieces right sides together, line up all the edges the best that we can, and then I'm going to pop some pins in. Now we're going to be sewing along the side of each drawn line, so I'm just being careful that my pins aren't going to get in the way. Now let's sew. So I've got my 1/4 inch foot on to get my 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm stitching at stitch length 2 and I'm using wonderful confetti thread. So all I'm going to do is sew along both sides of my drawn line on both of those drawn lines. So once we've done that, let's cut. So now what we're going to do is we do need to cut along our original drawn lines, but first what we're going to do is come in the center here and cut along here. So in total we're doing 4 cuts. I'm just going to take my ruler, line it up. I'm going to line up a line on my ruler on my straight edge there, line it up in the center where it's crossing over and cut. Now I'm using a rotating mat. If you don't have one, that's fine. Just be careful that it doesn't move. Now I'm going to go through the other side. And now I'm going to go through each of our original drawn diagonal lines. And like I said, I do have a video going over this step by step if you're finding this a little bit fast. Oh, now if it does move, just pop it back in place. Now we're going to press. I'm just going to show you. We now have our 8 half square triangles. So I'm just going to set my stitches out of habit. Now this isn't a quilt, so it's not really necessary. It's more of a craft project. Well, it is a craft project. But what I'm going to do is I am going to press up towards my dark fabric and press. And I'll repeat this for all my 8 half square triangles. And isn't the brown with the pink looking absolutely beautiful? I absolutely love working on fall projects. I love the colors. I love the warmth of the colors. These really are my favorite projects every year. So I'm excited that this is my first project for fall this year. Now we just need to trim all our half square triangles down to 2 inches squared. I don't have a perfect 2-inch square ruler, so I've got this one here. All I'm going to do is place the diagonal line on my ruler on top of my diagonal seam. Then I'm going to find the 2 inches mark on my ruler and just cut it to that 2-inch size. And I'm going to repeat this for all of my half square triangles. So now I've cut my half square triangles. I'm taking the rest of my small pieces and I'm going to lay them out so they match our image above. So once they're in the correct position, we can sew the outside rows together. So I'll sew these 4 pieces together, these 4 pieces together, then I'll sew these 2 pieces together, these 2 pieces together, and then sew them together. So then we'll have 3 rows, and then I'll sew those 3 rows together. And once I've done that, I'll meet you back here and we'll carry on. So I finished my star block, and isn't that just so cute? I did square it up so that it measures 6.5 inches by 6.5 inches squared. Now what we're going to do is take our two side pieces that measure 3.5 inches by 6.5 inches, and we're going to sew those to the side. Then we're going to take our 2 inches by 12.5 inches and sew them to the top and bottom. So I'll do that and I'll be right back. So before I sew on my top piece, I am going to press my seams over to this larger piece on each of the sides. And when I was sewing, I was making sure that these seams were being sewn down in the direction they were pressed. So now I'm just going to press the seams up towards the longer strip that we just sewed on, and you can double check that you haven't accidentally sewn your points off. The tip to that is when you can see the points here is making sure you're sewing on the outer side of the point, not inside or even into the point, which means you'd then lose it. And if you can't see the points and you're worried about it, you could see where they are and then just do a little marking with a washable marker just to make sure you're not accidentally chopping those off. But if you're happy with how it looks, let's move on, give that a press, and then we'll start constructing our hot pad. So now we've finished making the top of our hot pad. I'm just going to set that aside and show you the 3 layers that we're going to baste with the top of our hot pad. And all these pieces measure 10.5 inches by 13.5 inches. This is the backing, and I'm just going to flip it over so that the wrong side is facing me. Then I'm going to take my Insole Bright. Now this is a batting designed especially to work with hot items, and it will help protect your surface. You can find this on Amazon or your big box stores, and maybe even some of your small quilting shops. I'll put a link for this in the description below. And then we're also going to use a piece of regular batting, and that's just going to make it really nice and thick and protective. So I've just made sure all the edges are lined up nicely. They all measured the same size. Then I'm going to take my top and I'm going to place it on top. I'm just going to smooth it out. So we want to make sure all the layers are smoothed out nicely. We can flip it over and check the back, and that looks great. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to quilt this. So I need to keep all the layers in place. So I could have spray basted that, but today I'm just going to use my special pins. So just to hold it in place, I will use some basting pins. You could, like I said, you could spray baste it or use basting pins or just use regular pins. And I just want to make sure I'm going through all the layers. And it's only a small project, so I don't need to use too many. I'm going to start off by placing them all in the corners. Now, if you're popping a pin in and it's not going in nicely, that means it's blunt and it probably needs to be retired from your collection of basting pins, because we can accidentally damage our fabric if our pins are blunt, because then they will poke larger holes in our fabric. Okay, so that's looking great. Now what I want to do before I quilt it actually is I do want to just trace my pumpkin outline around it so I can just stitch around the outline so it will hold all our pieces together. So let's do that next. I'm just going to set this aside. So I've got my template here. It was actually from our scrappy pumpkin pot holder that we made previously. I printed out 2 copies. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut them both out. Then I'm going to flip one over so it's back to front, and then I'm just going to tape down the center so I get my full pumpkin shape. Now you don't need to use a template. You could always draw your own, but you can get a free copy of this over on my website, and I'll put a link down in the description below. So I'm just going to quickly do that and I'll meet you back here. So I've got my template here, and I'm actually going to just fold it back in half, and I'm going to find the center line of our star there and line up the fold mark so we know it's going to be right bang in the middle, our star that is. And then I'm just making sure it fits in, and we want to eyeball it so we've got about the same space at the top and the bottom. If anything, we'd probably want, I personally think we'd probably want a little bit of extra space at the top rather than the bottom. I just think that'll look nicer that way, but just do it however you'd like to do it. Once you're happy with how it's placed, I'm just going to fold that back down. Oh, we do need to make sure that the template is sitting within our piece, and then I'm just going to draw around it with my washable marker. You can use anything you like because we're not actually going to see it. Okay, there we go. Now you can see what it's going to kind of look like, and it's going to be absolutely adorable. So what we need to do is we need to sew around the outline of our pumpkin inside the line about 1/8 of an inch, and that's just going to be a basting stitch, so you can make that quite a large stitch. I'll probably turn mine up to stitch 5 or 6. And then what I'm going to do is just quilt, and I think I'll just do a stitch in the ditch along all my sew-on lines just so that that star's going to pop out. But of course you can quilt yours however you'd like. So I'm doing my best to sew nice and close to the line, but not on it because we'll be cutting on the line. But we also don't want our stitches too far out because when we sew our binding on, we need them to be covering these stitches. So now I'm just going to quickly do a stitch in the ditch along all my seams here. So I did bring my stitch down to 3, and then I'm just stopping right when I get outside the outline of my pumpkin because we'll be cutting along that edge. So I've finished my quilting, and maybe I could have done a little bit extra in here, but I think it's going to be totally fine. And I'm happy with it, so I'm just going to carry on. What I'm going to do now is just cut along my drawn line, and my stitches did get very close. It doesn't matter if I accidentally cut them here and there, it's just to keep the 3 layers together. But obviously I should have maybe tried to make sure they were a little bit more inside the line so that that doesn't happen in the first place. So I'm just going to really carefully cut around the shape. Now it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. So I've finished cutting it out and it is looking super cute. Now we need to just attach our binding so that we close off all our raw edges. Now you could of course just make regular binding. I would actually suggest making your own bias binding because we are going around a lot of curves. You do need it to be a little bit stretchy so it will do that nicely. Or I like to use this bias tape. It's kind of a cheats way, but I've been using this stuff for years and I absolutely love it. What it is bias tape, extra wide double fold. And this bias tape measures 0.5 inches wide. And what they mean by that is the width once it's folded. So it's 1/2 inch folded. So if you opened it up, it would be 1 inch wide. Let me open it up for you and show you what it looks like. So I've got my binding here. It measures about 1/2 inch wide. And when we open it up, it's about 1 inch. And we've got a fold there. What we do is we take the edge of our pot holder, push that right up to the edge and fold it, and then we clip it if we want to hold it in place and go around the pumpkin. Now what I did was I did just give it a quick press, and when I pressed it, I kind of pressed it on a curve just to help us get around the curves, and so hopefully it will sit a little bit nicer. So what we want to do is find the center of our pot holder, and we want to start about 1/2 inch to 1 inch to the left of it, and then we're going to come around clockwise. So I'm just going to open it up, push the fold onto the edge of our pot holder and push it down just like that. And here's our center here, and we've got it about about 1 inch past that center point. If you'd like to, you can use pins or clips rather, or you could just place it as you're sewing it, just whatever you're most comfortable with. I'll just pop a few clips on just to get started. Okay, and if you wanted to, you could just clip all the way around, but I'm just going to adjust it as I sew. Then when I come all the way around and back to where I started, I'm going to go past where I started, that is, and then carry on until about the center. And then I'll tell you what we're going to do when we get to that point. So I'm starting on the very edge of where that binding is, and I'm just going to use my foot to measure about 1/8 of an inch. Usually I'd be using my other sewing machine and I'd use my left compensating foot on my TL sewing machine, but today I'm using this machine, which is my Juki DX7, which Juki Junkies kindly loaned to me, and I'll put a link down below if you'd like to find out about either of those sewing machines. But what I'm trying to say is, is just find your 1/8 of an inch guide, and then let's just sew along the edge of our binding. I'm going to remove those clips as they get in the way. And I have changed my stitch length to a 3. I feel like that guide was a little bit too wide, so I'm just going to change what I'm going to use as my guide. I've got to admit, this DX7 does come with some wonderful feet. So I'm just using this so that I don't get my hands in the way, so you can actually see what's happening. It does actually help keep it all in place, so it is helpful for that reason too, not just for the video. Removing those clips, and then once I've got no more clips in place, I'm just going to make sure it is sitting exactly how I want it, about 3 inches ahead of where I'm sewing. Now I could just clip that if I want to, or I could just hold on to it, whatever you're most comfortable with. So the secret to this binding is just going nice and slow and not rushing it at all. You're just going to get a way nicer finish, and I feel like that's just really my motto for everything that I sew, is just take your time and enjoy the process, and then I think you'll be much happier with the finish as well. Now, I think I forgot to mention, I'm just going to stop, is that this binding has a right and a wrong side. Can you see that? On this side, it's shorter. You can see the back popping through. So the shorter side is the front side, to make sure that we're catching the back when we're sewing it like this. Sorry, I should have mentioned that earlier. So I'm just going to stop and adjust and make sure it's all sitting correctly and carry on. And in case you're wondering, this is really how slow I would sew it, even if I wasn't recording, just so that I know I'm just getting a really nice finish. So I'm coming up to the center now, and I can tell that because that's the center of our star there. And as I get to the center, what I actually want to do is pull the bias binding away, because now we're going to come away and create our loop. So I'm now pulling the binding off the edge of the pot holder and sewing along. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sew along my binding, and which is just going to sew it closed. And we need to have about 6 inches. Let me see, I'd rather have too much than not enough, because I can always just cut it. We could have stopped and measured it, but I think that will be about right. So I'm just going to trim it here and then just carry on. Okay. And then I'll show you what our next step will be. So I've cut this piece so it measures 6 inches from where it leaves the binding edge to the top edge here. Then what we're going to do is we're just going to fold it over like that to create our loop and kind of our stalk effect. So I'll just flip it over to the back. We're just going to fold this under about 1/4 of an inch, 1/2 an inch, and then we're going to tuck it down and sew it down like that. And we're going to sew it so it's just on our binding there, or just in the ditch, so we won't quite see it. But we want to make sure that we're happy with how it's sitting. For example, we don't want it sort of over that way so it looks crooked, or if we have it too far over this way it will just look a little bit weird. We want to make sure we're happy with how it's sitting on the front, and then when we're sure of that, then let's just flip it over and clip it down so it's going to look really nice and tidy. Okay, I'm just going to clip that in place, and all I'm going to do is just a few stitches just to hold that in place. So from the top here, I know that it's starting about here, so I'm just going to carefully place it under and stitch it from the front, because it always looks tidier when we've stitched it from the front. I'm just going to do it in the ditch, so we're not going to see it too much. So I'm just going to do a little stay stitch, or if you don't have that, you could do a back stitch, and then I'm going to go forward. I'm just going to move that out because I feel like it's just going to get knocked out of the way. Just going to hold it all in place because I don't want it to move. It's going to go nice and slowly. Well, actually, I'll use my little tool. You can feel I'm going through a few layers there, and I want to come right past it and then either do a back stitch or a little stay stitch if you've got that on your sewing machine, and cut the thread. Okay, so trim any loose threads. So there we have our pot holder. Isn't that absolutely adorable? That's the back, and I'm just in love with that. If you didn't like the way we did the loop, what you could do is you could just cut it and then fold it in and sew it down, and then you could just sew the loop on from the back and have it hanging from the front. But I really like doing it this way. So there's our adorable star pumpkin hot pad. I'm in love with it so much. Now, when you were sewing on the binding, if you did miss a few stitches like I did here on the back, where is it? Right here, I've just missed a few stitches. What I could do is just pull that over and then just try sewing it down again right over the top of those previous stitches. But don't worry too much. No one's going to be investigating your sewing. It's just going to look so cute. They're just going to be wowed by how cute it is. Thanks so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video and you think it gave value to you, please do remember to hit that like button and even better the subscribe button. I'd love to see you here again.